I would love to open it to anyone who wants to ask a question. Thanks, Maria, for your question in terms of template. And that's something that Rachel has put in. Amber, maybe while we're waiting for somebody to ask the question, not be shy.
I have a couple of questions when anyone's ready. I
Great.
just didn't.
Great. Why don't you go ahead?
One was on the resources. Thank you very much for answering that. And I see that you've given links in the chat there, Rachel. You spoke about tailoring your CV for the board position and what value add that you bring. When you're looking at the boards, would it therefore make sense to see the skill set of the board that you've got, or board that you might be applying for, and where they're missing your expertise?
Oh, absolutely. One of the key pieces of advice that I give to people actually when they're applying, but possibly more so when they're going for the interview, is find your seat at the table. If we just step back a minute, you produce your board CV, and that's your generic CV. But then obviously, as you apply for a particular role, you will tweak it depending upon that specific role. One CV won't fit every role. But I would, as definitely part of the process, is get to understand, go into everybody that's on the board, understand their skills, and find your seat at the table. There will not be a you at the table. There won't be. I can guarantee there will not be. And your first challenge is to say, well, why isn't there a me at the table? What do I mean by that? And that's going to be you helping to actually build up what your profile is. It tends to happen more naturally by the time you've come to the interview. And I'll always say to somebody, have you looked at the board? Have you figured out why you've got the interview? Well, because they clearly don't have a you because of your skills. It's a really important thing to do, definitely.
As you were talking, does anyone remember the book, What Color is Your Parachute? No, okay, if anyone's heard of it. I read it back in my 20s when I was looking at my career, and it basically says, write down everything that's great about you and then go and find that role. But it seems to be very much that that's the same thing in the board role. The other question that I had, if that's okay, is what are the salary ranges apart from 0 to, and how do you figure out, what does that negotiation look like? Do you come asking for something? Do they offer something? What does that look like?
Again, forgive me, I don't know about the more specialist areas that you're in, but more broadly, up until you get to the private sector, it's almost zero pay. Charities, for example, cannot pay. Sports bodies cannot pay. Housing associations pay you a bit, but not a lot. You'd be delighted if they offered you 12 grand a year to sit on a housing association board. That's reality. Public sector boards do pay. Pretty much all public bodies pay, but it tends to be a per day rate. Does it do much more than cover your expenses? Not really. Once you get into the listed roles, I can tell you I'm helping two companies at the moment. They're FTSE, they are paying between 50 and 70,000 for the position. One, for example, is saying 50,000 and officially 7 meetings a year, but expect a commitment there for 24 days annual. Now, 50's low, 50's low. But this is a recently listed, growing, ambitious company. You'd expect 70, I would say, as a typical listed company board.
And Bridget, I'd sort of chip in a bit on, I guess, the crypto blockchain tech space. Largely, the first area where you're negotiating for is either equity or tokens. You're looking for a percentage of the upside. And obviously, depending on how advanced the space is, that's kind of table stakes. Then the reality is your time is very valuable, right? You probably want some form of paid retainer. That can be anywhere from £1,000 to 50,000, but obviously like 50,000, would you be bringing a whole army of people, right? That's more a consultancy engagement. What I would recommend to people looking at doing advisory work in the crypto and blockchain space is take a project that you find really, really interesting and inspiring, take some of their tokens, take some of their equity, see if you can negotiate a fee. That's often dependent on how much money that project has at that time, or sometimes a success fee or capital raise, depending what your skill set is. Like, I think you'll find certain people, marketing people, corporate finance people, lawyers, those kind of people have the skill sets that startups will want to pay for, or programmers, right? Or whatever. A lot of other people, it will be a bit more, why are you at the table and why are they wanting to pay for you? But I think my view is in the tech startup space, you shouldn't be pressurizing a founder to compensate you, because I think that can be distasteful. And I think quite experienced executives can sometimes lead to the wrong dynamic with founders, just because they might not actually be experienced at scaling a startup, scaling a crypto business. I think it's just a very fluid negotiation. But I think the best thing with a lot of these roles is to dive in and see what happens.
Thanks, Toby. We have a couple of questions. She's asking what kind of board roles or sectors are available for senior HR professional. I would suggest that maybe Amber can pick that up. But in my viewpoint, I would think that if you're going to be working with startups, they are starving for your support because they're basically scaling up. Being able to understand what are the issues around that is key. And I would also even suggest that in some of the large banks, they're looking at reskilling and having somebody who's out be able to provide them with feedback. It's something that would be really greatly appreciated. Rachel or Amber, would you like to add anything to that?
Amber, you're on mute, Amber.
I would say with regards to HR role, I think they're quite relevant in banks, that's for sure, because we have a retention problem and we have a diversity problem and we have a pay gap problem. Having senior HR professionals on board of banks is something that I would strongly support. Similarly, I would say for sort of larger corporation, in the startup space, from my experience, I don't think there's a real need because the VCs that come on board usually have the skill set to, with regards to anything that is related to HR, anything that is relating to hiring, talent, retention, etc., especially when you're at this very, very fast growth space. But I think if you check with scale-ups, I think maybe that could be something that is interesting to them, especially scale-ups. I don't know what sector you specialize in, but I would say anything that is very highly technical and rare, i.e. C++ coders that are not very easy to find. If you have like strong experience in this, or that was the sector you're working in, definitely speaking with scale-ups in the deep tech space could be something interesting.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that. Rachel, did you want to add anything?
I can obviously add from, outside into other sectors that there's an absolute need for HR, but it's D&I, it's people, it's talent. They're the type of things that I see in the criteria of roles. Has there ever been a better time to be looking to join a remuneration committee? There are plenty of opportunities to join REMCOMs, I can assure you. So yes, I would say companies haven't always had HR directors on their boards, so they're missing that. That is a seat at the table, as we were talking about earlier. Absolutely, yeah, lots of demand.
Thank you so much. And the next question came from Jana. And I think part of it might have been answered, which was the salary range. It's from 0 to 50. And what do they look like for advisory board? And what is the typical time commitment in terms of appointment? Which is also somewhat the same question, which was asked by Gomati, who wants to know how many hours per week should be needed for a consultancy role. Toby, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of how long is a piece of string, really. I think you can really formally time box a lot of these things. I've never been particularly good at this. I've hired a project manager who was running crypto at Deutsche Bank. So she's now extremely good at that. Everything is costed, everything is mapped out. Normally, in an earlier stage business, there's a bit more of a sort of informal negotiation and fees. And then as you formalize it, you can have an hourly rate and a structure and just how that engagement operates. I think it all depends on the entrepreneurs and the people knowing the advisors and vice versa, and getting something that is a non-frustrating relationship, right? I think in the startup space, especially, there's a bit of a cat and mouse between advisors who are pseudo investors often and the founders. There's a lot of nuancing in the relationship of how those things get built up. And sometimes someone who you think might be your advisor ends up being the lead venture capitalist in your raise or whatever it is. It's a complex field, I'd say.
Sure, thank you.
If I may add something here, I think a good way to go about it is it's easier for you to just ask them, okay, what is the budget that you have for this consultancy role or for this advisory role? And then you get back to them telling them, for this salary, this is how much I can offer. This is how many hours I can offer. And within these hours, I will be able to do X, Y, Z, for example, not the rest. And you can start the negotiation from this point in time.
I'd like to add a little bit to this because I've had some of the experience being asked. I've looked at about 3 roles recently. Usually, in terms of time commitment, they will tell you anywhere between 1 to 2 days a month. And that doesn't always include just meeting. That also includes things like reviewing papers, providing advice, the board meetings, and depending on the maturity of the board, you could have very formalized meetings whereby it's a 3-hour meeting, may need to be face-to-face, and everything such as finance and also strategy is being brought to your attention. For those, you will have gotten the papers ahead of time to do a review, where you can figure about 5 to 6 hours to get yourself around that, which then comes into that 8 to 14 hour a month timing. I've had certain tell me that you will need to be flying overnight for a dinner prior to the board meeting, which means you're then looking at about 2 or 3 days in that timing when the board meetings are happening. And usually they will tell you formally when those dates will be on calendar, plus you will have informal meeting. Depending on the size of the company, you may also be asked to be participating in committees. Those can be the remuneration committee, the technology committee, and diverse things. For those, for the larger company, there will be a top up, which is put on top. Most of those large boards will ask you to actually be part of one. There is actually only 3 minutes left. I'd like to give a big thank you to everybody for your time. And I would like to give, starting with Toby, our esteemed guest, the opportunity to have one last minute and quickly tell us how you would go about it. Thank you.
I think on the point of valuing your time, the way I tend to look at those is try and have a portfolio of retainers. I think it's a good way of just ensuring that you're always getting a good income from that kind of activity. I think if you're of a certain mindset, advisory board and board roles are very interesting. If you're a typically inquisitive thinker, someone who's quite out of the box, it can be really, really valuable, and you can get very, very trusted relationships with interesting CEOs and people around the world. I've also seen both the advisor board role go wrong, both from the entrepreneur's perspective. I've had to fire a chairman before, and run into areas where the client doesn't listen to your advice. But anyway, lots to discuss.
Thank you so much, Toby. I hope everybody can stay a couple more minutes longer. I'd like to hear one quick from Amber and Rachel, and of course, our esteemed hostess, Bridget. Rachel, would you like to please give your last parting?
My call to arms statement. I think that there is never a better time to start looking at board opportunities than today. This time last year, boards were starting to resurface from a few months of stepping back and really wondering what on earth do we need now. There's never been a better time. Boards need talent. They need diversity. And please don't think for 1 minute that we are at a tipping point in terms of meeting those targets. We've met the targets. marvelous, but there's so much work to be done. And it is talent like you that needs to get on those boards and make the difference.
Thank you, Rachel. And Amber?
If you're running a business and you want to build your board, don't be ashamed or scared of trying to hit high, especially within your network, the ex-CEOs of the companies you were working in. Don't be afraid to go and ask them and tell them, I'm building this business, we have X revenues, we're growing at X, and we think that you could be a real addition to our boards in terms of XYZ. Again, you'd be surprised. A lot of people are looking for these types of roles, don't know where to find them, and are always willing to be part of a potential success story. That would be my last word.
Thank you, Amber. And to take us home, Bridget, would you like, please?
A huge thank you to everyone, Geneviève, Amber, Toby and Rachel, everyone showing up, especially asking your questions. I know that a couple of you have joined us in the bigger pie, so welcome. When it comes to things like negotiation of salaries, people will ask in the group, and I'll pull together select people who can give you their experience for the different types of roles that you're going into, and particularly in the crypto sector, where I can't say money anymore, I have to say fiat to how to define it. But it's not just sort of what salary expectations that might be in equity, but we also have the tokenization as well. Thank you very much, everyone. We are more than happy to continue these types of discussions in our community.
Thank you very much, everybody, and looking forward to seeing you guys online on the Bigger Pie channel. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks again, Geneviève.